Hello, hello, everybody. Here we are. How you doing? It's Sunday, and we're going to be talking about Stephen and Brendan and Magilla here with some more of his phenomenal research and some interesting insight that he brings to the table. So, welcome, Magilla, and welcome, Mr. Capaldi.
Hello. Thank you.
Nice to be here. Fully recovered from last night.
So, how's everybody out there in the chat doing? I see we got Linda K, we've got Jane Sharp. How you doing? Crockett Thompson, Tracy Bowman, Mary. So, how's everybody doing out there? Good to see you. What else we got here? Mary Jo Sardoner. Sorry if I'm horribly mispronouncing that. Z the Boxing Cat. There you go. There's a good one. Mm-hmm. All right. So, anyways, hello everybody. How you doing? We're here. We're live. We're actually on time. I know some of you are probably jaw dropped. So we're having a little fun, but obviously we're going to be talking about something a little bit serious. But obviously those of you who were here last week and got to hear about the dogs and the trails through the quarry and found that very interesting, have been looking forward to this one. And I know we all have. So, T1, hey, what's up, buddy? Good to see you. So I will at this point go ahead and defer to Magilla and allow him to start the presentation.
Good.
Well, hello, everybody. I prepared a lot of material for today again, like last week. If we get fatigued, we can probably put some of it off. I'm started with the talk that's going to talk about pelvic bones in this case. There's some controversy about the pelvic bones that were found in the county quarry. Mm-hmm. And there's another pelvic bone that I call the Ilium bone with the greater sciatic notch that I think is very important that hasn't been discussed much. And it's actually something I found that's a solution to a mystery that's been around for a couple of years. After that, I've got a talk on a follow-up talk from last week's talk on Loof Science. I got a lot of feedback from last week's talk, and some of it was interesting, and I want to share it with you. Right. It had to do with, of course, the human scent transfer and scent article contamination theory that would explain why the bloodhound seemed to have tracked someone other than Teresa. Mm-hmm. And then we also, of course, looked at the individual tracks and developed theories why they might exist. So let's get underway, I guess. I think probably the best way to view this is with the slides as wide as they can be.
Hold on a second. Let me.
Okay, and that's just all right. I got some flack on SAIG that people thought that having a gorilla avatar was a bad thing. So I'm just going to tell you I'm not really a gorilla, and I'm just doing this to amuse people. Okay, so and I really like gorillas, and that's about all there is to it.
Yes, and he likes Mr. People's Pet Shop.
Yes, and as a child I liked Magilla Gorilla cartoon. I had some other people call me Magilla growing up, which usually was not the most positive thing to be saying, but I grew to not mind it.
Right.
Some of my coaches called me Magilla, so.
Yeah, right.
All right.
And then, you can find him on Reddit.
Yep. So if you want to find me on Reddit, I'm using Magilla39. I post all my research on TikTok Manitowoc. That's the best place to find my material.
Right. He's also on Twitter now, folks, so look for him there.
Yes, based on constant urging, I went there and did my first post last week. Okay, so we're going to get into
big hit too, folks. So go check him out. Anyways, okay. Sorry.
All right, going to get into the case of the Ilium bone with the greater sciatic notch. So if we go into the first slide, this is the box of bones that supposedly was discovered in Stephen Avery's burn pit.
Right.
Contains a lot of fragments that don't look that different than human cremains coming out of a retort in a crematorium prior to going into the crematory, which crushes it down to dust.
Right.
There were some larger bones that were first examined by a Dr. Bennett and put in plastic bags, and then later Eisenberg also broke things out into plastic bags. Some of the plastic bags are shown here right on top of the bones. This was actually used as an evidence photo, and I think as we look into it, the reason is pretty clear: is they didn't want anybody to get a good idea what this meant. All right, so if we go on to the next slide.
Yep.
If we go back in history, the first person to examine bones found, so the bones were found on the 8th. The second day the blood dogs were there, if you remember from last week's talk. And they were brought to Madison, and the first person to examine them was a Dr. Kenneth Bennett. And Kenneth Bennett was a professor at the university there, and he was retired as a forensic anthropologist, but he was on call, and he examined them first, and he was the first one to say it was a female, and he gave the age range as 20 to 50, which is a pretty wide range, but that's all he could determine in his brief examination of the bones.
Right.
Okay. And this report came out on the 10th before Eisenberg has even examined the bones. This is an excerpt from his report. It says a DCI agent, Dorinda Freimiller, brought the bones to him. And it gives a description of how he found the bones in the box. He explains that there's no evidence to suggest there's animal bones in the bones he reviewed. And he goes on to say there were a few larger bones. If we go on, I skipped the middle page. The important thing was he's discussing the larger bones and the non-bone material in the box. And he says among the bony fragments was a part of the Ilium, Ischium, acetabulum, or
right?
I'm just guessing on these. If there's any doctors out there, you probably know.
I don't know. We're in the neighborhood, though.
And one of the things he refers to is the greater sciatic notch with an angulation of approximately 90 degrees.
Strongly indicative of a female, right?
Right. So there's a bone in there with the we sort of all know the ilium bone is the big flat bone in our pelvis, and he calls out two different parts of it and talks about a specific feature, the greater sciatic notch, which if we go on, I think this is the search warrants, and we can see that Dr. Bennett's determination that this was a female, and we can see that they specifically say that it was based on the characteristics of the ilium bone. So this greater sciatic notch was an important part of the early determination that these bones were female cremains.
Right.
And this was all before any reports were put out by Leslie Eisenberg. Now, some of you might remember there was a controversy where people thought that search warrant might be based on the bones from the County Quarry burn pit, because those were the only ilium bones that anybody's ever seen. But I decided to research this further, so in my desire to try to memorize even more things, I pulled up an anatomy drawing of the pelvis, which is a little daunting. And anybody who's gone to med school probably just gets nightmares looking at pictures like this because they had to be tested on it.
Right.
But you'll see there's something pointing out the greater sciatic notch here. So the greater sciatic notch on the ilium is the inner curved surface that the sciatic nerve is channeled through. And it's all
in here.
No, it's is there some way for me to put it's called out in the, if you look at the top left call out, greater sciatic notch.
Top left. Okay, yeah, I see that. Here's the greater, the notch, right?
The notch is that curve, and the part that's on the ilium is what we're interested in.
Okay.
So he's calling out a very specific part of the pelvis that's actually low in the pelvis. He also called out two other parts, the ischium and the acetabolum. So if we go down, that is neck, as if we didn't have enough things called out on this picture. Most of us just call this the pelvis, right?
I see ischial.
But I think that's one of the issues. So if we go to the next slide, here's a close-up of the ilium. And we can see the acetabellum is actually the socket for the ball and socket joint that is the hip.
Okay.
You see, so here I've got the red called out. And
right,
we can see
this little area here.
And then the ischium is actually this loop down there that forms the pubis area.
Oh, I see.
There's one on each side. So if you remember what the pelvic bones from the quarry look like, they did not look like this. Okay,
right.
So if we go on a little further, this angle he's measuring, there's a very specific way to find to measure it. You have to identify these 3 points in that notch and then measure the angle. And this angle's been studied by forensic anthropologists, and it's one of the things that's really good for determining the sex of a victim.
Right.
Okay, so as we go down, you can see sometimes they call it GSNA for greater sciatic notch angle. These are actually human remains from archaeological sites.
Right.
But this bone they're looking at is actually exactly what's missing. It's the part of the pelvis with the greater sciatic notch in it. So, right. And then it's got the ball joint part there and a part of the pubic loop.
Right.
Okay, the one on the left is for a woman, and the one on the right's for a man. The reason women had to evolve differently from men here is that this all plays into
a baby being born through there.
Yes, yeah, the size of the size that you can push something through the pelvis without extruding its head into a shape that will not be viable.
Right, right.
So I guess that was somewhat clinical. So we're looking for something that looks like that. Those aren't really cremains. They're just old fossilized.
Right, fossilized remains, right.
I found a European Society of Radiology book that gave the statistics on it. So in studies, they found that the men usually have a greater sciatic notch angle of 67 degrees. And the range of observations went up to 90.1. Mm-hmm. But 90, as Dr. Bennett said, would be on the very edge of the men's range, very unlikely to be a man.
Right.
This data, it's not bell curve, but it is center weighted. And to be on the tail is to be unlikely. For a woman, the average is 83 degrees. And it's usually between 60 and 100 degrees. So 90 falls pretty much in the mid to high range for a woman.
Right.
So that's why Dr. Bennett felt this bone
was female. Right.
Was female, but also that it's also distinctly human.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And he said that right in his report. Now Dr. Bennett, he was no schlub. He actually wrote the field guide for that, a well-used field guide for forensic anthropologists.
Yeah.
And this just shows the part of his report again where he's talking about the ilium, ischium, acetabolum.
Right.
So let's just back up now. This is the 10th of November, and the state is sitting on a pelvic bone that was key to them sexing the victim, and that pelvic bone is not the bones found in the quarry because it's not from the. Well, that's what we'll get into. I think the next slide might take us there.
Okay.
This is just some questions I had during the exploration. Let's skip past this and try to get to. So
part 2.
I went out and started looking at this titer. Okay, so this is one of the Reddit posts. This was from a fellow Redditor who was on TikTok Manitowoc a long time, named Foghaze. This is a very famous post. Got 244 upvotes. But the theory that she was putting forward, or he was putting forward, I'm not supposed to know the sex of the individual, was that the ilium was a bone from the quarry because no other pelvic bones were photographed and shown as evidence to us. We've never seen the bone that they claim came from the burn pit that was part of the pelvis.
Wow.
Okay.
Interesting.
And if anybody's out there and has a picture of this thing, so this is probably my best picture. So really get this one under. So here are the two bones from the quarry and where they would be on this pelvis. I'm pretty sure I have them oriented properly. So what we have is this what they call iliac wing section. That's really the outer edge of the quarry. It has a little curve in it, but that's not the greater sciatic notch. It's a lesser notch, I think they call it. And then we have the iliac crest, which may I'm not sure the word articulate is proper here because these bones are broken instead of this being a suture line or a joint, but it may have a common fracture line with the iliac wing. That was never mentioned by Eisenberg, and you can see that they're from the same ilium. Well, this piece that's missing, that Dr. Bennett examined, is pretty much the whole rest of that pelvis, and it may have common fracture lines or articulate with the two bones we had.
Right.
If it did, it would do two things. It would prove that the other two fragments were human because they connect to a bone fragment that had a unique human feature. And it would also show that they were from the same body. So this missing bone could be a really valuable piece of exculpatory evidence for the defense that could prove without further testing that the bones at the county quarry were from the same human body.
Right.
Unfortunately,
obviously why KZ was quick to jump on it.
Well, unfortunately, the bone evidence, of course, is. I think this was a lot more exciting until we found out the bone evidence had been
given back
to the Hall box, and
right.
It's not clear what they had done with it, but they probably had it put through a crematorium crusher and turned to dust.
I heard it was buried, but by this time it's been contaminated, and
Yeah, this might be, since this is just the shape of the bones being confirming, it might be something that could be proved if exhumed, if they didn't further process the bones.
Right.
Normally a crematorium would make it into dust before they returned it to you.
Oh, I see.
To keep it from being too gruesome.
Right.
Okay, so some questions. Could the ilium bone fragment that Dr. Bennett looked at, could it connect or articulate with the bone fragments from the quarry burn pit? This, as I said, that would be very valuable to the defense. The defense was trying to argue these were human bones. Eisenberg was trying to say that she was neutral, but she kept denying that she could prove it. And of course, Kratz in his summation was saying it's totally irrelevant. Don't look at it. They're just throwing. There's bones everywhere in the world.
Not going to spend 20 seconds. Yeah. Right? Is that what you're referring to, Kratz?
Yeah, 20. Yeah, he made some.
I'm not even going to spend 20 seconds talking about those bones.
Because that's just totally unimportant. Right. Well, it's possible that this is a huge Brady violation, and they kept this bone from being understood by the defense.
Yeah.
By not photographing it. And the Bennett report, I noticed the Bennett report was, I think, second to last on a discovery list I saw from old Kratz. So he was trying to bury it in the discovery, even though it was an important piece of evidence. Of course, unfortunately, the defense team was so buried in work, and they had to actually sort of gamble on what they worked on because they didn't have enough time to cover all the information. Okay?
Yep.
In there, I say that I really think a lot of Eisenberg's exhibits at trial were designed to cover up the facts here.
Yeah. So I agree with you on that, because if quickly to illustrate that for everybody, you got to look at the way she was pretty convinced they were human leading up to trial. Then suddenly, right around time of trial, suddenly it's all become foggy. And then right after trial, you see the prosecutors in this case using her reports to give bones back. So it's pretty clear everybody believed they were human, that there was just this kind of facade put on for trial. So anyways, yes, sorry. Continue.
Probably directed by Ken Sweaty Hands Kratz.
Yeah. Right.
So if we go to the next slide, this was the exhibit she used for the bones found in the burn pit. And as we get a little later, what I think this was meant to do was to give you the impression that they found like a whole human skeleton.
Right.
I think when you walk away from this, she's not identifying what part of these bones she found. She's just saying, we found bones like this, and she's
right from this area.
She has 30 arrows at a full human skeleton. Right. So, and also, I found this in the CASO report figures that were being prepared. That's actually what I used to make my my earlier figure that was showing how these pelvic bones might fit together. It seemed like she was going to actually show what was found, with a reasonable illustration, and that was never developed further for trial.
Right.
But it was helpful to me. Okay, so we're going to get into part 3 here. There's a brief talk if we go on. I'm trying to make a point here that really we all know what a good forensic anthropologist does when they find human remains. They do an anatomical reconstruction. You can see a good one right here on the left.
Yeah.
What the state provided was full human skeleton drawings with call-outs, a lot of call-outs, no details about what those call-outs mean, and then they show you this box of bones.
Right. Very underwhelming.
Well, the thing is, there's really only about 30% of the skeleton recovered. If they've done the right thing, so if you think about this normal anatomical layout that a anthropologist does, it's graphically illustrated how much of the skeleton is recovered, and it's graphically illustrated how much of it remains to be discovered. And neither of those stories was good for the state. Are we supposed to believe that a forensic anthropologist has never seen a full body recovery done for bones discovered, and that she just had to keep getting them out of these boxes and putting them back in, and that they didn't conspire to not develop these exhibits?
Right.
If we go on a little bit more, just showing if we had an anatomical layout, it would clearly show where the bones belong, whether the bones are for one body or two. When you do this, if you get 3 femurs, you're saying that's pretty unlikely that that one body had 3 femurs.
Right.
So there's, even though you might not have really thought about it before, this anatomical layout is really intelligent, and that's why they do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we go on, again, we're just going over the misleading evidence tag, the bad photo. Now, I just wanted to do a call to the crowd here. I think there was an exhibit of bones at trial that was a lot of bones mounted on some sort of exhibit. And I recall a picture of Jerry Buting walking past it and somebody taking a picture that showed up and making a murderer. I've never seen photos of that exhibit, but the photos we have, this bone is not photographed at all in the photos we have, other than I think I found a picture of a baggie labeled pelvis by Eisenberg where you can't even see the bones inside. So if anybody's aware of other photographs, I would have expected this forensic anthropologist to also have taken every bone and taken 2 photos of it, top side and bottom side. Right. And if those photos exist, they've never been shared with us, and I don't know if the defense has them or not. If the defense does have them, there may be a chance to take this bone and actually make a very good photographic argument that the bones connect.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, so I found this. This is Eisenberg's pelvis. So I can't tell if this is cat excrement or
right. It's rather
so
rather hard to tell what it is. Yeah.
Okay, this is another exhibit I developed that Eisenberg's implying that this could be something like the pelvis of a deer. That there was nothing anatomically unique about these 2 bones that meant it couldn't have been from a deer. So here I'm showing you, here's a human female pelvis, a deer pelvis. I don't know where she's matching this up on a deer. The other thing she'd tend to do is say, well, I'm not an expert on that, and just sort of punt it. So it's like, I don't know, it's not an animal, and I don't know anything about animals, so I don't want to discuss this any further.
Yeah, right.
Well, there's only about 5 or 6 types of animals that there might have been bones there for, and somebody could have done some research and actually looked at whether it matched up anatomically with any of them. And I'm pretty sure it doesn't. I think these 2 bones are some of the most readily identifiable as human. This one here, this was an early mock-up I had. This one actually doesn't match because the side of the pelvic bone that's up is actually the back side. And you can actually sort of see it doesn't match. If we go back to where I did the anatomy, the best slide I have is that one with the 2 bones and then the call out of what the missing bone would look like. Just keep going. You'll stop when you get there.
This one?
It looks like that, but it's got my overlays on it. Here it is.
One?
Yeah, so if you look at that bone versus the back side of this bone, you'll see that raised ridge on the bone is a characteristic of the human bone. And it is wrong the other way. It bulges in the wrong direction. But if you look on the fault line I've drawn, it's going right through that raised part, which is
right. You're saying this one here goes right here.
Yeah, and that raised part.
This art notch right here or whatever is part of this.
Right, and if you look at other human pelvises, you'll see the size of that notch varies, but that ridge is very characteristic.
Right.
The size and shape of the iliac crest is also very characteristically human, and that that great sciatic notch is characteristically human, as is the hip socket. So all three of these bones, I think a good case could have been made that they were characteristically human.
Right.
And
therefore a female. And
the missing bone proved it was a female.
right. All right, so let's go.
Now what's interesting, I don't know if I put it, I think, yeah, if we get back to where we were, you definitely don't want to go through these slides again, as many as I have in this deck.
Let's see.
Yeah, so
we just finished. Yeah, okay, so this is where we were.
No,
we were in the facial bone fragments.
Okay, back up a second.
Sure.
Before we get to that. So, so the call here is one more thing. In Eisenberg's report, she doesn't refer to this bone at all in determining the sex of the victim, which is very suspicious because she should have been handed Dr. Bennett's report, and he put that bone specifically in a baggie by itself, and it was the highlight of the report, and it's what was used in the search warrant. Now, in Eisenberg's report, she uses the head of the femur diameter and like 4 or 5 things that she can look up in a table that says what percentile it would be as a man and what is a woman. And the bones together make a strong case that it's a woman. This single measurement makes a strong case it's a woman by itself. But she never mentions it because I think she's purposely hiding it.
Yeah. Or just, whatever reason. Yeah, it's weird.
So it could be a big Brady violation. This evidence of this bone may have been withheld from the defense. I guess Jerry Buting would and Strang would be the best ones to know.
Right.
But be on the lookout for any sort of photos of the bones that might contain that the missing ilium with the greater sciatic notch. Okay, so I'm going to get into some more investigations I did of the bones, but that story's pretty much over. So the first thing we're going to do is go through the facial bones. So I think a lot of people have seen this photograph of the facial bones, but maybe they didn't notice. These are actually laid out pretty close to anatomical order. So
right. And these are the eye socket ones, right?
Yeah, but even there, she presented it rather than focus. That actually, they were hoping would really get people to realize that that's a human. But even there, they really only have about 40% of the bones involved in the eye sockets.
Tiny percentage, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, the way she presented those bones again, go back up and just before the way she presented them, of course, is showing a full skull and just having a bunch of call outs.
Right. Oh, yeah, right.
I think again she's trying to mislead the jury into thinking she found almost the full.
There's more than there was, right?
There's 14 facial bones, and she found, fragments of 6 of them. I think Zellner said there's 31 missing teeth. So, and teeth usually survive cremation. So,
right, yeah, because the nature of them and the enamel and everything, they tend to hold together and resist the heat longer.
Right. So, so one thing I did was develop a call out from the bones just to show how this would have given you a better feeling. It would have explained that the top photograph was an anatomical position. Nearly. I think 2 of the fragments aren't even. She didn't seem to try to even position them properly.
Right. But the jury would have seen how much is actually missing, and wouldn't have been maybe filling it in with their own imagination how much they thought was there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so. I think if they could have reconstructed a good part of the skeleton, I think it would have been very effective with the jury.
Right.
But the fact is, there's so many bones missing that they couldn't do that.
Right.
All right, if we go on. This was work done on the GeorgeZipperer.com site. where I think he or she, I don't know who actually runs the site. They recently took all their materials down, but I don't think they'd mind me sharing this with you if I credit them. So
really, they took it down.
They took down a lot of their materials.
A lot?
Oh. I don't. Yeah. It's still a bunch of it's still in Time Machine, but
okay, interesting.
Yeah. So
I hadn't heard that, so that's interesting. But we can move on. I'll check into that later.
Okay. So here again, you see just how small a number of the facial bones they had for reconstruction. Okay, so now we're going to go to, I think, the cranial bones. All right, before we get into this,
disclaimer.
This part might be a little more gory than the rest. It's definitely, I know we've already been looking at human bone remains, but
if there are any children 14 and under, we'd like to ask them to leave. I'm sorry. Anyways, no.
Okay,
seriously, this is sensitive stuff, so really take it seriously. But
I view what I'm doing here as a hobby, but sometimes I obsess on it. And I had a bad nightmare, and that's what really gave me this theory of the gunshot wounds. So we're going to go through a theory of the gunshot wounds using the bones. This first slide is sort of an introduction to my theory. This is a photo of an execution-style murder by a Mexican cartel member, where they actually they put this photo up on and sent it out on a cell phone so that they could let people know they were doing it, but their identity was hidden. But we've all seen this on television, or at least talked about on television. Maybe the person talks their way out of this, but a person is bound or forced to kneel, bow their head, and they're shot in the back of the head.
Right.
So that's what my dream was. If we go on and look, and we're going to now look at that. When we look at the occipital defect in the cranial bone, so this is just a human skeleton. This isn't actually anyone's bones from the case, but it's showing where the occipital defect is in the back of the head. Now, what it suggests,
where we see the beveling.
Yeah, we'll get into all that. I have pictures of the actual bones later, but I want to stay on this one while I talk a little bit. Can you? And what happens is that the first thing that struck me is it isn't totally centered. It's slightly off to the side, the left side. But if you imagine that the person who's kneeling is trying to hear what the person behind them is saying and is turning their head slightly to their left, what happens with the rotation of the skull is that point actually gets centered, centered to somebody who would be pointing a gun at the back of their head.
Right.
The person's trying to both hear, so they're rotating their ear to hear, and they're probably trying to speak to that person, probably begging to not be shot. So what I imagine, if this theory is true, that the point of entry is indicating that the head is rotated slightly to the left.
Right. Sure. I'm following that.
Now, these also, just to discuss cranial bones in general, our cranial bones connect on what the medical community calls suture lines, which are those jagged fracture lines shown there. Those are just normal parts of our skull where we have growth plates, and they allow, they're very flexible when we're newborn, and they allow us to have our head deformed during childbirth.
Right.
Okay. So if we go on, we see the second shot is, it's shown here as being directly to the temple. So if we imagine that this was an execution-style killing and she was on her knees with her head turned slightly right, after the shot, she would have fell forward. Her head's turned to the left. She's going to fall onto her right cheek, and probably her left side of her head is going to be exposed.
Right.
And I think the second thing they did was put an insurance shot through her temple.
Right.
I know, and I am not a professional at this. This was just
Something that occurred to you.
occurred to me. Well, I think it is consistent with the evidence, and it paints a different picture of the shooting. A long time ago, there was a theory floating around that maybe she was accidentally shot with one of the 22s, and then I know what you're saying. She's accidentally shot twice, both in the head, on different sides of her head. It really doesn't hold together that she was So we sort of gave up on that theory. A lot of theories have gone around. And I think this cleanly explains what it is. It looks like a small caliber weapon fired twice to her head, probably in an execution style killing.
Right.
I think with her turned away from the killer.
Sure.
Okay, and then if we go further. Okay, so what I'm showing here is the shot to the back of the head. I've enhanced these photos from the exhibits that were presented by the state because I've taken the X-ray photo and I've rotated it, and I've also zoomed it so it's approximately the same size as the normal photo. There's a few things to see here. You can see the beveling of the defect in the skull, suggesting we're looking at the inside of the skull, and this was an entry wound that would cause more skull to break out the more it pushed through it.
Right.
We can also see in the X-ray that at that beveling, there are a number of what we call radio-opaque particles.
Right.
And if we believe Eisenberg, she actually did go to an SEM and prove these were lead. A couple people who I've shown these to remarked, it looks like a piece of the bone is missing on the left. You can see that there seems to be like a thinner outer cranium piece in the upper right corner on the X-ray.
Yeah.
That seems to be gone on the left. I think that's because that's what happens when you carry evidence around unwrapped in boxes.
I think you may be right.
Okay, but if we're to believe Eisenberg, and I don't see why she'd be lying about this, this is pretty positive evidence of a gunshot wound. I want to also say that the magic bullet has no tie to this crime at all. We now know it has wood in it and red paint, and was covered in a waxy coating. And that this hole is not definitively a 22 at all either. I'm not even sure it's definitively small caliber. This bone is the shot through the temple. This bone is called the parietal cranium bone.
Parietal.
I know how to say that, but for some reason I parietal cranial bone. This bone has some uniquely human things on it. These grooves on this. So this is the inside of this bone, and it has these unique grooves for the meningeal artery and its branches. So this provides blood to the brain,
Right.
and it branches up. And the shape here is characteristically human. So this bone would have been identified as characteristically human.
Interesting.
We do see, so the entry wound bevel is shown on this picture too. There really aren't any radio-opaque particles by this entry wound. It's possible this one was made by a poker while the skull was in the fire. But this was identified as a gunshot. So it might have been just one shot to the back of the head. The argument that this is convincingly a gunshot wound, I think, could be debated.
Yeah.
I think the size of the wound is consistent with the size on the other bone, though. So it looks like the whole. It has a diameter of maybe a centimeter.
Looks like there's one speck there, potentially, maybe.
Actually, if you look at the X-rays, there's a lot of areas that show up radio opaque,
Yeah.
especially on brake lines that aren't lead. So,
All
um,
right.
so we go down because we haven't had enough anatomy photos yet. Now that for those of you who try to win at Jeopardy, we all know there's 14 facial bones and 8 cranial bones, giving the skull 22 individual bones. Of course, not counting teeth. The cranial bones, there are 4 major bones that connect at suture lines. And the parietal bone is the pink one here. And we can see
Here?
it's called out, the top call out on the right.
Sorry.
It's the big pink bone. And the occipital bone, which is over the occipital cortex, which is our vision center, is that brown bone on the back.
Oh, here. Yes.
Okay, so if we go forward, now we actually have a human skull from a cadaver that's been cleaned and cut in half. And we're looking at this parietal bone, and I have a close-up zoomed in on it, and you can clearly see the meningeal artery and its branches, the tract that's in that bone for that.
Right.
And that is characteristically human, the shape of it. The branching is actually, varies between individuals. It develops as the brain develops, but the general shape of it is characteristically human. And you can see that it's right in front of that suture line between the frontal cranium and the parietal cranium bone.
Right.
Parietal lobe. I don't know, for some reason my brain doesn't want to say that today. Okay, so
and then here would be the other bone, right? So
right. Now the other one you can also see is the occipital bone is actually pretty low on the skull, so that would suggest that her head was bowed forward.
Right.
It's not gruesome enough. And just to give you a side by side here, so here's the known human skull, and these are the parietal cranium bone fragment.
Very, very
and
similar.
you can see the grooves. Now you can also see, I think if you look at this skull, you can see that the shot or hole that might be from a poker or some other object that they were stirring a fire with,
right.
Seems significantly higher in the head than the call out by Dr. Eisenberg.
Right.
So sloppy work again. Once again, here's just radio opaque particles, and I think I'm just making the point that I match this to the testimony, if you go to the next slide, of Eisenberg saying that she swears this is lead.
Right. All right, but that was
one thing I found out is that tires use zinc oxide as a filler in their sidewalls, and zinc oxide is also radio opaque. So there could be other radio opaque material in this fire if they're right about her being cremated with tires. So if this is all we have in the testimony that proves that they did something, normally this would have took putting this under a scanning electron microscope and doing a certain type of surface study to prove that this created the spectrum line.
Probably exactly what Chris Palahniuk wants to do.
Right. So it's possible. I long ago had a theory that it might be zinc oxide, especially the fragments that are in the bones and the number of other radio opaque areas in the X-rays don't look like other gunshot wound X-rays that I've reviewed.
Right.
because I don't make a living reviewing gunshot wound X-rays.
Right. Yeah.
But emergency room doctors do.
There you go.
Okay, so unfortunately. So if we go down a little bit, where are we going with this? Okay. So
There's an uncanny resemblance between them two.
no, but the point is, after I did this, I had a post, and another member of TikTok Manitowoc told me that he lives in the vicinity, and that there were murders in that area of people. He actually had a relative who's had a cousin who was shot in his own backyard, execution style, in that area.
Oh, wow.
So what that got me doing was, and he said that all the murders he's seen that way were in that area were drug related.
Mhm.
Okay, so when I heard that, it got me rethinking about our forgotten victim, Carmen Boutwell. Carmen, of course, was found the morning of November 4th. She had died November 3rd from an overdose of methadone. The police and the newspapers were not, the case was not investigated very well. And the articles that were immediately put out implied that Carmen was a well-known heroin addict. Turns out that Carmen's autopsy shows there were no opioids in her system, and heroin would have shown up for quite a long time in that scan. And she had methadone only, and the level of methadone in her system would have been lethal for someone who hadn't developed
A tolerance.
tolerance for opioids.
Right.
But the level was one that probably could have been tolerated by somebody with a tolerance for opioids.
Right.
Sorry, can I just ask a question, because that is mentioned in the chat there. What specifically does radio opaque mean? I know what opaque. I think it means like milky colored. Is that right?
No, radio opaque means it doesn't allow X-rays through.
Right. Okay.
So radiology is X-rays, and radio opaque means in radiology photographs it's opaque.
Right.
So our bones are much more radio opaque than the rest of us. That's why X-rays just show our bones.
Hmm.
But they aren't totally radio opaque, so they show up as more or less grayish white. Right. If something's totally radio opaque, like lead, nothing gets through it, and it'll show up as bright white on an X-ray.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah. So I'm sorry that
sorry to stop you there.
Yeah, I pick up way too much terminology, and but okay. So we're getting back to Carmen's story. There's a lot of suspicious things about Carmen's death. By coincidence, it happens the same day that the Teresa Halbach investigation is opened. In fact, we have some police recordings where they hear about Carmen's body being discovered, and they think it might be actually the same case.
Right.
Carmen was actually in the court system at that time for a very strange hit and run charge and a THC possession charge.
Mm-hmm.
And she was trying to work out a plea with the district attorney in Manitowoc. And I have heard from some people who claim to have known her family, so this is all hearsay, but that Carmen was worried about talking to the district attorney. So she might have been scared of her drug dealers.
Right.
So
it may have been turning evidence on them.
She would have been being encouraged to turn evidence on them.
Right. And they would have seen, drug dealers would have seen her as a liability, whether she didn't.
Right. And then this is very early in the opioid crisis, but it's possible the methadone shot was a hotshot prepared to kill her. She also had alcohol and marijuana in her system. Marijuana was consistent with her having quit smoking a half hour before her death. And the alcohol was consistent with her having 4 drinks in an hour. So we start getting a different picture of what was going on. She was also staying in the same apartment building that her grandmother lived in. There's a false rumor that she had an apartment in Sheboygan that actually had to do with the people who were processing the hit and run case. Got her a Manitowoc address and wrote Sheboygan as the city. She never lived in Sheboygan. So she didn't like move back from Sheboygan to live with her grandmother. She was living with her grandmother. She was attending community college. Her friends said that she liked smoking pot a little bit too much. And the newspapers painted her as being a longtime heroin addict, which a lot of them don't believe happened. So she's this. Also, her case was closed as accidental overdose immediately.
Right.
Her autopsy was actually not done in Manitowoc because the Manitowoc resources were too busy trying to get on the Stephen Avery property and being blocked by law enforcement. And her, I think Waukesha, a Waukesha medical examiner actually did her autopsy and said there was, I've heard rumors that there was some evidence of strangulation in it. I've only seen one page of the autopsy though, and I can't confirm that firsthand.
That'd be an interesting development.
Okay, so I mean, this is totally different than Loof. Loof is giving us evidence that's highly inculpatory of people living in Teresa's house.
Right.
But this theory is with an execution-style murder. And I've also been told this picture is very misleading, that Carmen had gone with a very short haircut. Recently, she almost just wearing her hair like a boy with short hair. And that these glasses are drawn on Teresa, and they really don't look that close to each other. This is making it
maybe
appear like they're doppelgangers, but
I don't know about doppelgangers, but they have a similar aspect, a similar, I
think if
frame, a similar hair color.
My idea would be that the dealer might have had somebody keeping an eye to make sure that she wasn't bolting town. Might have seen Teresa, thought Teresa was Carmen, forced her off the road. By the time he figures out it's not the person he thought it was, he's committed a crime.
Right.
So I think it's good to remember Carmen. I think Teresa's remembered in a very fond light, and I don't think Carmen's memory should be that she was some sort of heroin addict that didn't deserve attention at the time.
No, I don't. Yeah, I've heard all the same things. It doesn't fit that she was a heroin addict. There's no real evidence to back that up. So yeah, I agree.
So with Go On, I think I actually have some slides for this. All right, so we've talked through most of this. This is just all the things that made me think of this scenario.
Right.
This will be posted if people wanted this talk like I did last week. So this is the article that came out almost immediately in the local paper about her. There's some interesting things in here. The Manitowoc City Police Department captain said that this is actually an article. This is an article from 2014, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that this was one of the first in what has become an epidemic of prescription drug crime in the area. So it was something that the police were not ready for at that time. They hadn't seen any of it. And she was like the second case in the area. Also, there's someone in this article that said that they know that she didn't have a prescription for methadone and that she had obtained it illegally.
Okay.
Yeah, they found go back to that last paragraph. It's good. Investigators found no evidence of who might have given her the prescription narcotic used for pain relief, and so they have no idea who she got it from, which seems suspicious because there's this guy in 2014. This guy is well known, the Candy Man, for giving out pain pills, and there's people on the street who are his patients making $10,000 a month reselling it. So,
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
okay, so we go down. What's this one?
Somebody's selling Xanax, Ambien, Vicodin.
Okay, yeah. So it turns out if you go through Kratz's removal and potential disbarment hearings, Kratz admits at the time, and then actually admitted to a newspaper, that he was addicted to drugs in this time period.
Mm-hmm.
In this article, Kratz tries to blame it on the great pressure of the Stephen Avery case, where the pressure really didn't happen until Making a Murder comes out. The Stephen Avery case was him walking all over Avery. So it's very self-serving comments. He said he took a Xanax, Ambien, and Vicodin cocktail.
Right.
The cocktail's quoted. He says his behavior was erratic and deplorable, and he's so sorry for it.
Yeah. I remember him saying that on Dr. Drew. So.
Yeah, well, the fact is that he never provided the state evidence of who he was getting these drugs from.
Right.
So it's not too far-fetched to think that this prescription drug circle might have included Kratz.
Could very well be.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting, though.
So this is,
you get the feeling they just were with Kratz. They were like, "Dude, don't go away, man. Dude, just go away. You've embarrassed us enough."
Well, they sure wouldn't have treated other people that way.
They didn't seem interested in disciplining him.
Well, I don't think they were interested in finding out who was selling these prescription drugs.
Yeah, okay. So fair enough.
All right, if we go on. Now, I think these prescription drugs are a story. Whether it actually links to Teresa's death or not, it's a story unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is a write-up I did on, I think the man's Dr. Zyman. I think I'm allowed to say that here. On Reddit, I referred to him as Dr. RXXX.
Right. Okay.
And he was referred to on the street as the Candy Man, and that's the nickname Remacher had for him too.
Okay.
So this man was arrested in 2014. He was suspended from practicing medicine in 2015. And Remacher gave an affidavit that said he knew about him being the Candy Man and the place to go for prescription drugs since 1999. And this guy who worked at a hospital in Manitowoc, he told people he saw 20 patients a day. He worked at a hospital for 20 years, 20 to 25 patients, but his nurses said he saw 70. And once again, I already said some of his patients were getting prescriptions and just turning around to sell them, and they were making a good amount of money. Apparently, when the police investigated, they couldn't find a financial angle on this guy. So supposedly, he's just writing all these excessive prescriptions without getting any money from anybody.
Wow. Unless it was, I don't know. Anyway.
Well, it
might have been a payment other than monetarily.
Well, I think he gets a payment probably from the drug company somehow for prescribing so much.
Right, maybe a bonus of some sort, right?
Well, it's
incentive, I should say.
But they claim they didn't find it. He had to have been making them a lot of money. Now, his family, his wife was on the Chamber of Commerce at Manitowoc City, and she's still there. She changed her last name after his death. going back to her maiden name.
Wow.
So it's possible he was well connected in Manitowoc, and he was prosecuted federally.
Oh, federally.
Yeah, so the amount he was prescribing people were also absurdly large.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so
Next one.
there's just more on the Candy Man.
Dr. RXXXX.
Yeah, hold on. Go back up to that 1,200 number is good. So a former patient received 1,200 oxycodone pills in 1 month.
Whoa.
Now, even Rush Limbaugh, I don't think, was taking 1,200 in a month. So I'm not sure about this number, but that didn't raise any flags for this guy.
Yeah, that's a lot of oxycodone.
Okay, and this is where there's a comment by Remiker. He said it was physically impossible to consume that much without complete incapacitation or death. It was like, but he was prescribing that amount.
Right.
All right.
He's later acquitted, though.
So he was acquitted. He claimed to not understand the lethal limit on it, and he understood that because of tolerance. So the tolerance with opiates, your body actually develops ways to destroy it faster.
Right.
So you're insulting the body, and the liver actually learns how to get rid of it faster. So as you use opiates, the reason you need more and more is your body starts destroying it faster, and it just
harder
goes.
to maintain that high. Right.
So to get the high, you need it in your bloodstream, and apparently you can go up that curve an awful long way because the lethality of the drugs is eliminated by your liver's ability to get rid of it faster.
Right.
So what he thought were these people were just developing tolerance, and he could just keep prescribing them more and more and more, so they would still get the pain relief effect. That's what he said in trial.
Right. Right.
And that he's just a gullible idiot. I don't see how that happened, but
right.
a jury
I
believed him.
know that's what happened with Bradley from Sublime, the lead singer for Sublime. He quit doing heroin and he had built up quite a tolerance, and he quit doing it for a year after their first album came out. And then I think after their second album came out, they were out partying one night and celebrating, and somebody had some heroin, and he decided to go ahead and do it again. But instead of accounting for the fact that he had spent a year off of it,
Yeah,
he just went like right back to his old dose. Boom.
and it was lethal. Yeah,
And that's how we lost him. Yeah. So
yeah. These drugs are very dangerous.
yeah, definitely.
Methadone treatment is very dangerous because when somebody has the high opioid tolerance, you have to treat them with levels of methadone that would be lethal. So
Yeah, right. Normally lethal, right.
right, and then when you've been weaned off of it, so with methadone, what they try to give you is a dose that'll keep you from having withdrawal pain, and then when you're weaned off of it, if you do relapse, your tolerance is unknown to you. So while you're going through the treatment, you're vulnerable to overdose.
Right.
So let's try to keep all our loved ones away from these drugs.
The opioids are pretty bad, yeah.
Okay, and then just back to Carmen. Here was an article that gave all the Manitowoc County drug-related deaths for 10 years. I think I might have cut it off. No, I probably did it. Came out in 2014. 2004, there was a female who died. 2005, there was only one, methadone and alcohol. That's Carmen Boutwell. So you can see that there was very little going on. And then you see there's more than one methadone death here. So there's somebody in the area putting out methadone. And methadone is actually sort of much more common in these overdoses than it normally is.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, methadone is not a preferred street drug.
Yeah. You usually got to get it from a clinic.
Yeah, you get it from a clinic, or in some places they actually have vans drive around and give you drinkable sort of methadone.
Right.
But where they go where the addicts are hanging out and try to alleviate the suffering so they don't steal and rob people.
Right.
But it ramps up. You can see in 2009 there's a whole lot more deaths.
Yeah.
And I think 2010 is big. So
Yeah.
this was all happening right at the start of this prescription drug problem in this area. Somebody made a lot of money in this area. It probably connects to that doctor as the source of the drugs.
Right.
And I did not find any prescription drug dealers. I found a way to search the Wisconsin Circuit Court documents. I looked at every methadone-related case, and I did not find anybody. Well, actually, I looked for narcotics. I looked at every case in there for narcotics, and I didn't find anybody in this area getting arrested for it.
Yeah.
Which, if you're in charge of the drug unit in that area, Remacher, doesn't speak so well of your effectiveness.
Right. Yeah, if you knew about this guy for 15 years, it's like, yeah, really? 15? What were you doing about it?
He said he first heard about it in 99.
Right.
Making a murder. The case is happening in late 2005. So this guy had been operating for almost 6 years.
Or that would be 6 years at that point. But yeah, still, years.
Yeah. Well, and they're starting to see people dying.
Right.
All right.
Oh.
Okay, so we're
right here. Hold on. And
okay, so
food science, woo! Anyway.
Okay, so we're gonna get off that. I put that in there because
that unpleasant business.
Yes. So put that in there because I think people forget Carmen too much.
Yeah, well.
Okay, so
what happened with Carmen? So, all right.
So we're going to go back. So last week we went through the literature on scent dogs. I talked about my theory of human scent transfer and scent article contamination, explaining why the scent dogs found all these tracks that logically couldn't be from Teresa. And we went through the tracks to develop theories of what the tracks might be telling us. And very interestingly, one appeared overnight on the 8th where the dogs had checked the same area out. And it seemed to be showing us bone planning. We seemed to see people either arriving at the RAV4 to look at it or leaving the RAV4 in a way that would be consistent with Wilmer's description. And there were other tracks.
Right.
So I received some feedback on that, both through Reddit and other means.
Yes.
And we'll go through that. So we're returning to the Bloodhound.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like this Bloodhound safely holding down the floor.
Yeah.
Another job of theirs.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
With their jowls. Anyway.
They're very well designed for holding down the floor, I think.
Yeah.
So one of the things I did was sort of launch this material onto Twitter.
Yep. There he is, folks. He joined the cool kids.
Okay. So I took the map slide from that and made a nice graphic for a Twitter page.
Yep.
And I said, what did I put as the teaser text on this one? Oh yeah. So why are all Loof's scent dog tracks consistent with the defense theory if we assume Loof wasn't tracking Teresa? And then I point out what all the tracks are and using elements of the defenses theory. Stephen sees taillights. There's a track for that. Bone planting. Planting the RAV4. Leaving where the RAV4 was planted.
Right.
And then trucking through the Redont and quarry and turning the car over to go down to the county quarry or come up from it.
Right.
All right. So we went through all that. And if you want more of that, there's plenty in last week's talk.
Absolutely. Look up last week's video, folks, from last Sunday. Look it up, and you'll be able to review it.
So based on, I wanted to make this clear, so I took Loof Track 6 and I cut out a section. So I made this Twitter post. Let's look at the graphic. So you got it happen. So it just shows the place where we suspect someone might have parked near Wilmer's house, the track around Wilmer's house, and then leaving that area and turning up Jamba Creek Road.
Right.
And we know from the map that Ryan turned in that his group was looking at Jamba Creek Road. And my teaser here was, why are we seeing tracks like this? We know Teresa wasn't searching for herself, right?
Right. Right.
Okay. So we go
Right.
on. Just wanted to show you what I was doing on Twitter. Here's that full graphic. So you can see the location we talked about where we think the car might have been parked.
All right.
Okay, and this is another Loof track that we didn't talk about in last week's talk. I think I showed just the part that goes around the deer camp.
Okay, right.
But this is actually an interesting track by itself. If you theorize that the other one was people leaving, planning the RAV4, but a couple cars come back and they want to go see where the RAV4 is, say Ryan taking law enforcement, they could park back where this strange loop is. Remember to pay attention to Loof's strange loops. This could have been the vicinity of two automobiles back here, that thing that looks sort of like a man's hand. And then maybe they walk to the RAV4 and back, and then together they walk to the vicinity of the deer camp to spy on Stephen Avery and back.
Right.
So when I give these theories, I don't know specifically for each one. Some of them seem very obvious, like the bone planning, but none of them seem like things that couldn't have happened, and they all seem to fit the defense's theory.
Right.
Okay, so we got a new Loof track to think about. Okay, I got a lot of feedback, especially on Reddit, from people who like certain parts of the scent contamination theory better than others. So one thing I got was all sorts of people with cats saying, my cat would have definitely done that, saying rubbed itself against those shoes and then rubbed up against the legs of the people living in the house.
Right.
So if we go with the one study we found with the suspended pulley, just having Teresa's scent like on your coat or carrying something that is Teresa's with you wouldn't have left this trail. It had to be associated with your shoes, your socks, your feet, and your legs. Because if you don't do that, that's the pulley trail without touching the ground. The dogs aren't able to track that in the experiments by the German colonel.
Right.
So that sort of shoots the whole souvenir concept. That somebody wasn't just walking around with a souvenir. It had to be on their legs, shoes, and feet. And then I actually received a post. Somebody sent me a link that shows 22 pictures of cats, sticking their heads into shoes. So my cats occasionally did that. So apparently people think that's pretty common. And then I also received a lot of links of people showing that cats just love to rub up against your feet and legs.
Oh, yeah.
And here it's feet, legs, shoes. Yeah, they're just swimming against you.
Yep.
Favorite scratching post. Now so that was just something that happened as feedback from people. The other theory is that the men living in the house may have contaminated the scent object, the shoe. So one person sent me in this picture, which I don't think is a real likely theory, but it was somewhat humorous.
Yeah.
Maybe Scott and Ryan were worshiping her shoes.
Maybe.
Some people like it.
Well, those high heels definitely. Krax is fond of those, isn't he?
Well, oh, that's right. It could have been maybe Kratz. Was he over there?
Well, he loves high heels.
Yep.
Yep. Well, they go well with his calves.
Yeah.
His shapely calves. If we go down, though, when I was talking about contamination, I was really talking about a different thing. I was talking about dead human skin cells. So
Right.
I didn't think I really got that across in the talk. So I decided to go collect some research on human skin shedding. This article said that we shed 30,000 to 40,000 skin cells an hour, which sounds pretty bad, right? But if you divide that by 60, it's only it's only 500 skin cells a minute. So, and then on a per second basis, it's only like 8 skin cells. So it's not like our skin's just falling off continuously. It's just a few are being abraded off here and there, and it just adds up.
Yeah.
Now, it turns out that our feet are heavy shedders.
Right.
But if we go on, I found this. Oh, there's also an interesting tidbit in there. There's actually 8 pounds of skin that we shed each year.
Wow.
So that's one way you lose weight, but it's hard to increase the amount. People who are compulsive hand washers actually start exposing their live skin cells, which is really dangerous for infection. So I don't want anybody to try to lose weight by washing their hands too much. Okay, if we go down lower. Yeah, so there's lots of fun stuff there on human skin cells. I actually found an amazing video showing fingertip perspiring that I don't think I included the link in here, but it was amazing and everybody should see it. Okay, so if we go down to where we can see the next photo, this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So this article is saying that dust, household dust, which we're all familiar with, I think guys are more familiar than women because women clean it up and guys let it accumulate for long periods of time sometimes. This article says that 50% of that dust is shed human skin cells.
Oh, there you go. That's fun. That's a fun thought.
And not only that, but shed human skin cells are the perfect environment for something called dust mites.
Yeah.
Which is why you should really listen to your significant other, girl, guys, and help with the dusting. This is really disgusting to have this dust around. But we also know that Teresa thought that a certain roommate of hers was a pig. We got that in an email of hers named Scott.
Right.
And I suspect now that Teresa was gone, there wasn't a whole lot of dusting going on at their house. And the 2 guys in there shedding skin cells, I guess 4 days of Ryan's skin cells and who knows how many days of... and we really don't know when the shoes were last worn. There's a good chance that there are some skin cells from them on those shoes. Okay?
Right.
And some cat scent. I think everybody buys that. So the human scent transfer. So let me just go through this a little bit. The human scent transfer theory, I'm tending to believe less now that we know it had to be on their feet and legs, because they're rolling in her stuff and they're on her floor and her carpet. It's still reasonable to think they did pick up some of her scent. But these other 2, I think all 3 mechanisms probably did happen, and it's difficult to know to what extent.
Right.
And if the extent was enough that the scent dogs were tracking them, which I think the scent dog tracks make it clear they were tracking somebody.
They're certainly on the trail. Somebody. Yeah.
Right. So, all right. So, whodunit? The other thing I did was I did a brief write up on who does the Loof theory exculpate and who does it inculpate. Okay, so we were talking just about the track evidence. So, like we said last week, and this was a Twitter post I developed, it really tends to inculpate the people that were living at her house.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, Scott, and maybe somebody who liked to go over there, I think, and play with her cat. Sometimes you have a friend that comes over that just loves your cat.
Yeah.
Now, Ryan, of course, was the one who gave the Madison.com article. He's the one I discovered she even had a cat. So he said he was over there and it was great to see her cat to the press. So Ryan sounded like a cat lover.
Yeah.
But then I also found out that he posted a picture. This is actually Ryan's cat, Emma. So,
Oh, I see.
and she seems to be trying to rub her scent on the carpet here.
Yeah.
Which is another way it can get transferred to your feet. So, and even if you're in stocking feet, if you put shoes back on over those socks without changing your socks, you're picking up cat scent. So,
right.
So Ryan is a cat owner now. He suggested he was a cat lover by the remarks he made to the newspaper. I don't know what Scott was, and I'm sure some of Teresa's friends like the cat too.
Right.
In my experience, female cats are less social than neutered males, though, and less likely to associate with strangers. But I would say the expert on that would be our UK person because they have many more years of experience with cats. Any comment, Paul? All right.
I'm not actually a great cat person. I think I was a mouse in a previous life.
Yeah. There certainly is a dark side to cats, especially if you're a small animal being tortured.
Yeah.
All right, so we go on. So definitely it inculpates, but I think this is it really exculpates Stephen. Okay, so let's go through the arguments here. I'm showing the tracks. This is the track that suggests somebody planted bones on the 8th, or the night of the 7th, to see the track on the 8th. The reason it exculpates Stephen so much is Stephen was all over the place. He wasn't just walking these tracks. These dogs wouldn't have found these unique tracks for Stephen. They would have found tracks for Stephen going up Avery Road, going down Avery Road, going over to Barb's house, going to Dolores's house. Stephen said he was in his backyard, So the problem with saying these tracks were left by Stephen is there would have been other tracks left by Stephen all over the place, and the dogs didn't react in those areas.
Yeah.
So I think if the loof tracks are true, it strongly exculpates Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so if we go through the whodunit list, the next slide's on Bobby and Mike O. So I think this would exculpate Bobby and Mike O too for a similar reason. We know on the day the police came that these two guys were sitting in a garage playing with a deer carcass. So they would have at least been leaving their scent all over Bobby's driveway, Bobby's garage. Bobby said to have come out and hung out around that trailer and talked to people. Bobby was probably behind his own house. So why, for the similar reason to Bobby, it doesn't make sense that other tracks weren't found if it was Bobby.
Okay.
Being on the property tends to exculpate you now because the dogs did find unique tracks in areas leading away from the property.
Right.
Also, how does the scent article get contaminated with them? My only theory for the scent article was it might have been a souvenir, or they might not have washed since the time of the encounter.
Right.
Most of those are long shots too. Okay, so we have a person on TikTok, Manitowalk, who goes by the handle seven pairs of panties.
Yeah.
Who's a
7-Pop, we call.
yeah, 7-Pop when you don't want to say the whole thing. So, so I found this interesting photo of the police using a scent dog and pulling up. I don't think these are actually panties, but I think they're a pair of tidy whities.
That's what they look like.
Yeah, but
they look like tie-dyed or something. It's weird. I don't know.
I think they have dirt on them. The dog looks like it's scared to death of what it found. Right?
Yeah, it does. Actually.
Oh my God!
Get that away from me! Oh my Lord!
That smells even something a dog doesn't like. So the problem with law enforcement leaving this tracks, now the law enforcement picked up the shoes, and there were law enforcement people in Teresa's house, but we have from Serafowski that the shoes were delivered in plastic bags. So the law enforcement person probably did put the shoes in plastic bags immediately. Pretty much all they could have done is touch the edge of the shoe with their hand. Maybe they were even smart enough to wear latex gloves picking them up. I might be giving them a lot of credit there. But that same law enforcement person who picked up the shoes and contaminated it with his scent, he has to be the one that's also doing the trails around the house. The very same person. I think it was a CASO officer. The CASO officers are less suspected than the Manitowoc County officers. And it just seems pretty far-fetched that these tracks were left by law enforcement. Everybody's welcome to comment, and if you come up with a rationale whether this makes sense, just let me know. These working theories are meant to be explored and improved.
Right.
Okay. But it does seem to exculpate them for these trails.
Right.
And oddly enough, it doesn't really seem likely that it's Scott Sciatic either. I got this picture's from somebody's recreation of the 3-car race, and I thought they had some cute icons of Scott in his truck there, so that's the only reason I've included it.
It looks like the movie Rat Race, like the opening for the movie Rat Race. But anyway.
Yeah, there's Bobby's headed south, Scott's headed north, and Teresa's just leaving the Avery Road. They just wave to each other as they're off to deer hunt. I think Bobby and Scott are hiding something.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so if we assume Scott very seldom gets out of his car at Barb's,
mm-hmm.
then he could leave unique trails, because the trail left while he's in his car might be pretty light.
Right.
And then, but how does he contaminate the scent article? He doesn't know Teresa. At the time these trails are being left down, I don't think he knows much of anything.
Mm-hmm.
Unless he's involved, obviously. So
it's hard to say, but there's enough dishonesty to make you wonder.
I just don't see any way he could have contaminated the scent article. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yep, I hear you.
Again, you're saying he had to get the scent from Teresa on his legs and shoes, and it had to stay there. I think my best theory there is he might have had some special boots that he only used for hiking. The boots got the scent, and he always went back to those same boots when he was going to do this nefarious stuff.
Maybe.
So we have the possible theory of the special boots is about the best thing I've come up with. But the special boots is a pretty thin theory.
Right on.
Yeah. Okay, so we've gone through our primary suspects, and it's really, the loof tracks still really point back to...
Yep.
Yeah, this is the end of the loof tracks update. So loof tracks point back to Teresa's house and point back strongly at Ryan and Scott as being suspects of leaving the tracks.
Right.
Probably some of the strongest physical evidence we got. Alrighty, so I've one more talk, but we could call it here if you want. I don't know how long we've been going.
I was going to say, rather than do another 20 slides, which would take a little while because we are at an hour and a half, maybe some folks out in the live chat have some questions.
Okay.
And we save the Brendan thing for next time. And I tell you, I definitely do want to do whatever you have for Brendan. We're very much going to do that. So, but I think in sometimes people have trouble sitting down for 2 hours.
Well, absolutely.
So I just wanted to make it more digestible in that sense.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Give me a target time. I'll.
No worries. We'll always play it by ear, but I think now would be a good time to maybe open it up and see if anybody has questions. So if anybody does,
well, I've got a few questions.
Oh, there you go. Paul can start it off, and I'm going to let you guys excuse me for just a second while I head to the restroom. So.
So, first of all, I wanted to go back to the original slide about the quarry bones. So I think I was picking up that if the quarry bones that were found, if some of them were checked against some of the bones found in the burn pit, there would be some sort of a match. You were talking about they would articulate. Does that mean that in effect, like a jigsaw, they would fit together?
Yes. So
yeah,
I'm not sure if the word articulate is used to describe bones connecting. I don't know if it's restricted to on suture lines and joint lines.
Mm-hmm.
But these bones were fractured together, and the fractures fractures have unique patterns.
Yes.
And if they're the two sides that got fractured, you can show that the bones fit together, which is very compelling evidence that they came from the same body.
Same bone, yeah.
And they've already said that the pelvic bone that was found in the burn pit is human. It has strongly characteristic human form. The greater sciatic notch being one, the shape of the hip joint is another, and the fact that it has a descending pubic bone. So that's really the big thing about that bone, and it's the thing that would make it very exculpatory, is because it would prove that the county quarry bones were human and from the same body, which is even beyond it being human.
Yeah. In other words, the simple fact that they would fit together, you would need to do any DNA test, any fancy science,
Right. And I even think you can, if you do very accurate photography work, you might be able to do that using a photograph. So it's possible there's a photograph of this bone sitting around somewhere.
Yeah.
I would have expected the forensic anthropologist to have taken top and bottom pictures of every bone isolated and put them in a book. And we see evidence that she did that with some of the bones because they presented them as evidence at trial. But we weren't given the full book of all the bones she found. And I suspect it might exist. I would hope the defense has it. So it's possible a good person working with photographs might be able to make a compelling argument just from the photographs.
Sure. And then we got onto the subject of the way that you were talking about, the fact that, we're used to seeing the full skeleton.
Right.
There is that full skeleton. And the state were rather sort of misleading in presenting, the fact that we found these bones and they are from this sort of full skeleton or the full skull, and it was a way of basically trying to cover the fact that there was only 30% of these bones. And I don't believe there was any from the rib area, was there?
No, there's a lot of things missing. I think there's some pieces they said are ribs, but there's certain parts like where the ribs connect to the spine that certain things that are hard to burn, and it was remarked that maybe those pieces were thrown into a river or something because they would have been taken even much longer to separate. So I think the fact they didn't lay it out, it could be just Eisenberg thought she didn't have time to spend on this case. I don't know how many cases she's working on at a time. She was working on some case where she claimed she found a human fetus remains, and it turned out it wasn't. So maybe she was off doing her magic there. But laying it out would have vividly shown just how much of the body is missing. I think 30% of the skeleton laying there. It also would have given so much more information than any of the bone exhibits they had. So
I suppose what we're looking at now then is who's responsible for this sort of deliberate sort of misleading? More likely to be Eisenberg, or do you think it's a case of Ken Kratz thinking, well,
I think it was orchestrated by Kratz, but I think they were willing.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Talking about Ken Kratz.
So we have a question from the audience. Is Kenneth Bennett available for questioning? Unfortunately, and I include on my Reddit page a link to his memorial page, but Kenneth is dead. And he died a very happy person. He is a brilliant man who in his retirement studied all sorts of subjects that went well beyond what he was trained in. And there's a lot of really nice things said about him. His family has fond memories of him. I think he did live into his late 70s, so he
long, full life. There you go. So, all right. Perhaps we can give our opinions on this one.
Well,
the defense didn't have them. First of all, the FBI was the one that tested them. And who knows what LeBeau was thinking when he decided only 3 of them were necessary. I mean, right? I don't know.
Yeah, so we have a problem, and I know some people get mad at the original defense lawyers, but the way they viewed the case is they had limited resources, and they almost had to gamble on what they invested their time in. And that was forced on them by the system. They weren't rich people, and they couldn't afford to do massive amounts of pro bono work. The $400,000 that was spent on the case was largely spent to do things for the defense, not as salary to the 2 lawyers. So you have to understand that against 54 state witnesses and an unbelievable budget, now they could have cried bloody murder more, but what they did was play the game under those constraints. I think one of the things we really like about Zellner is she's developed enough wealth that she can blow the constraints up. She has the reputation to bring in these world-class forensic people, sometimes pro bono, and it turns the tables on the state. But you have to remember the original lawyers had a very limited amount of money to defend.
Right.
There was a massive amount of evidence in this case that could have been looked at. I think in hindsight, unfortunately, they developed this theory of that vial of blood, spent way too much time on that, and then got waylaid by the late discovery from the FBI. So the fact that that's happening after they've developed all their theories and given their opening arguments just totally crushed the case that they did invest their time in.
Right. So, how much do you know about Christine Rudy, Magilla? Because somebody had this question.
No, I don't know much.
Bummer.
If somebody could brief me.
Well, we'll have to ask that question next time, Vanessa. We'll have to, maybe we'll get some videos so you can brush up on the case a little bit and give you an opinion.
New lead for me. So,
yeah, I figured it might be, but I figured we would ask. Let's see here. What do we have?
Sorry, can I just ask though? Can you remember Ken Kratz? One of his victims, I'm sure that that she was also explained to Ken Kratz that one of her problems was the fact that she was also on this cocktail of drugs.
You mean one of the ones that he
yeah,
with?
yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's obvious that this prescription drug issue was pretty prevalent at that time.
Yeah.
It's even more prevalent now, but maybe they had a common connection. The fact that they didn't look into his connection,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe he had just lied to doctors and got multiple prescriptions from different doctors. I don't know, but I mean, somebody had to go try to find out what was happening, and
yeah, just before this one from Vanessa, I'm sure we read in the OLR report it was item number 48 by Judge Kinney. No, it wasn't. It was the OLR report based on the report by Judge Kinney.
Right.
OLR point number 48. Ken Kratz provided no evidence to show that he was on this cocktail of drugs.
Right.
But yeah, if he really was, I'm just wondering if he got the story from one of his victims. But yeah, I mean, if it's as Magilla's point said, if he's taking all these drugs, who's supplying him?
Right, and also he's compromised for investigating those people.
Yeah,
because they know he's a drug user, and that means that he's in a position where he would have been protecting that drug ring.
Well, you mentioned this Dr. Candyman. I mean, clearly he was. I seem to get the impression that he was operating kind of under the protection of the sheriff's department.
Well, I think the fact that he operated for 20 years without being picked up when they knew about him the whole time, and people are dying, that it suggests something suspicious going on.
Yeah.
And even the second level, the patients of his that were dealing, I didn't find any narcotics cases in Manitowoc for any of them either.
No.
Okay, so did we get to that
question that gets asked a lot? So I figured I'd put it up.
Can you just scroll back? Can you show the
Vanessa's real quick?
No, just if you have for a background, could you just show the picture of the pelvis with the 3 bones? We went through that, and it would have been nice if you were in here illustrating for us. But yeah, I guess you're not in PowerPoint, so you can't just tile and go. But yeah, it's probably way back there. So
ways back, but
I can answer the previous question too. I had looked at it. Okay, so we have the question here: is it's possible the cremains were Carmen Boutwell's? Okay, so this is an interesting problem. Carmen was autopsied on the 4th, and her funeral service was, I believe it was at 1:30 on the 8th. And after the funeral service, she was taken away to a crematorium. So she was on display at the funeral in an open casket ceremony. So she doesn't get cremated until sometime after, I think after 1:30 p.m. on the 8th. Now, if we look at the police record, Pevito, I think it is, says he saw bones the morning of the 8th, which would rule out Carmen. But his discussion is real sketchy, and there are people who think he was referring to some piece of insulation that was later discovered. He basically said something looked a lot like a bone, and nothing from that pit looked a lot like a bone.
Right.
Also, the time that Pevito discovered it isn't recorded directly in the police reports, and it's just presented during trial testimony as, "Oh, I know this for sure." So it's very possible that the state wanted to establish an early time for it. there is some evidence of someone talking about it around 1:30 that afternoon, but even that time I think is sketchy. So I would say the likelihood of her getting cremated after 1:30 and still having bones discovered on the 8th is low.
Right.
But there's a couple of pieces of evidence that still suggest that the state can't establish the times the bones were really found.
Right. Okay.
The 1:30 number was one of the Louvre tracks. So, and it is well established that Louvre had the bone planting track prior to the end of Carmen's funeral. So, if I really tried to, I could probably disprove the Carmen bone theory.
Right.
Very suspicious that her funeral's the same day as the bones being discovered, but I have already checked, and it was an open casket ceremony, and she hadn't been cremated yet until the ceremony was over. Typically, people do go straight to the cremation retort from their funeral. They try to time it out so that bodies aren't being held at the crematorium.
Right.
You hold them in a morgue or in a preparing lab. If you've ever seen 6 Feet Under, it's like, and then once they're at the funeral, they either go to be buried or they go to the crematorium without waiting.
Right.
Now, I have heard a story that the family didn't get the cremains for 3 weeks, and that the state had offered to help and was involved, or the police had offered to help because the autopsy had delayed the handling of the body, and there's some things mysterious there too. But I think just strictly on the timeline, if you take the Louvre track discovering the bones being planted, I think that happens at 1:30 in the afternoon, and Carmen hasn't been cremated yet.
Right. Let's see here. So this person asks if any of us knows if the dirt on the RAV4 was ever tested against the dirt in the quarry. I gotta say, I don't think I've ever heard about a test of that type taking place myself.
Yeah, so you can look at the composition of the dirt and match it to the general composition of other places. I think there was a lot of dirt on the side of the RAV4 that seemed to have been thrown up by the tires. I think last week we talked a little bit about the fact that if they went in the lower conveyor road, they would have had to pull off the road into the mud for a short period because the road was blocked by a big stack of cars. So it's possible that the mud got on there, or it's possible it was somewhere in the quarry. I have looked at geological maps of the area, and a lot of the area is made up. It's all this glacier moraine where the glacier receded, and the ground is made up of very common elements all in that area for vast distances.
Right. So let's see. Do you have an opinion on if law enforcement is the sole planners of the bones? Why would they scatter them out instead of all in one place like the burn pit?
Okay, so
the whole thing is we think that the bones got dropped and, it's like a breadcrumb trail leading to Stephen's burn pit kind of, but
well, what I don't think law enforcement planted the bones. So my theory is that law enforcement had control of the property, as Erekose said. I think they had a police car out in front of Stephen's trailer, or at least they claim he was there all the time.
Right.
He might have been wandering around bored. And I know there's pictures of a law enforcement officer standing near the cell phone barrel in front. So I think somebody snuck on to dump the cremains into the pit from the deer park. as shown in loop track 6. I also think that the cremains would have fit in a 5-gallon pail or something, maybe even a little smaller than that. I think the person who did it was worried about being discovered by the law enforcement officer. So they ran across to the pit and ran back. And I think they spilled some going to the pit. That's my best guess of how it got strewn across Stephen's lawn. Then I think what happened was wherever the primary burn site, if the primary burn site is in the county quarry, I think the person spread the ashes there so they'd look less suspicious. So I think the reason there's multiple piles in the quarry is because they were spreading the ashes from the primary burn pit.
Right.
I don't think they wanted to risk doing another run at Stephen's pit after the one bucket full.
Right. Right.
I think the amount works out that would easily fit in a bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Rule is calling to attention is calling to attention two bones that were apparently entered into evidence on the 12th, but actually found on the 6th. So that's interesting.
Yeah. I've recently read through some of the materials on like this research that happened at the site where they were sifting the bones, where they say they put them through some sort of sifting, and then later they re-examined the material that had gone through the sifter that had been left on a blue tarp. I'm concerned that they don't really know the origins of those bones that were on the blue tarp, that maybe a lot of people were dumping what they had left on that blue tarp. The most important thing, I think, is the bones from John de Burn Barrel number 2. There's very few bones that were associated with that barrel. And if they came from someplace else, it would be very important. My best theory for the little bit that was left there is that somebody had some residue that they found on them in their car and decided to hide it in the burn barrel.
Yeah.
That theory most points at Bobby. So if he had done something in his truck, came back, found some of those bones in his truck bed, I could see him sweeping that up and dumping it halfway down his burn barrel, which is, I think, what they're saying happened.
Right.
It was mixed in with trash and like chicken carcasses, so it had garbage with it.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Any more questions here?
Okay, so those bones were found in Michael's quarry. Which bones?
The two bones he was referring to that were logged into evidence on the 12th, but actually found on the 6th. He's saying that they were found in McKell's quarry.
Okay.
That's the rule. He's on Twitter. You can hit him up on Twitter if you.
Okay,
you know,
I haven't followed any theory of those bones at this time. So.
Yeah, Rule's a real sharp guy. Real sharp dude. Member of the Wrecking Crew. So I'm sure you'll like him. I'm sure you guys will hit it off. So
the suggestion that those got planted. Somebody tried to claim those were from Mabry's too. Is it? Even though it's recorded, it was picked up somewhere else.
Yeah, I guess they're trying to say it's part of Teresa's, or they were logged in as bone evidence.
Okay, well, I'll take a look at that. I definitely would love to see this case get closed.
Dude, Rule is from, I believe, the Groningen area of the Netherlands.
Well, great.
Yeah, Rule, yes.
Yeah. It's it's amazing how well the Dutch speak English and read it and write it.
Yeah, because I can tell you, I worked with a team of Dutch people early in my career, and my ability to understand Dutch is extremely limited. So they did make some great barbecued chicken with some type of peanut sauce.
Rule's English is fantastic.
Yeah.
You should hear some of the little ditties that he's made. Little tunes. He's a piano player too.
Yes.
I played softball with them, and you didn't want to put it low in the zone because they all were like cricket swingers, and if you could keep it up in the zone, they were hopeless.
There you go. There you go. All right. So, let's see. Any other questions here? How does the RAV turnaround fit in all this?
How does which?
How does the RAV and the turnaround fit into all this? Somebody was asking here.
Okay, so
that one there.
On some working theories, the RAV at the Twin River Dam site that is very important. On others, it looks like it's probably a false sighting. So there's a pivotal piece of evidence that's still debated is when was the RAV4 there during the November 4th flyover? Mm-hmm. There's one frame out of the entire film where there's some photographic evidence that suggests it was. If it was, it strongly would indicate that the car that was at that turnaround was a different car. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't, it strongly would indicate that the RAV4 was probably planted the night of the 4th, which is, I think that's the Zellner's leading theory, or it was.
Right.
I actually have looked at that photographic evidence, and I tend to think it was there already on the 4th. And Wilmer sort of gives his description of the Jeep and the RAV going in. I think he had thought it was earlier in the week. So one of the witnesses at the turnabout gives very specific information that the windshield was cracked and the passenger window, where most of the other witnesses just say they saw it down there. What it made me think was that witness probably actually stopped and went and looked at it, while the others just drove by. We also have a similar colored SUV being described by Blaine that he claims to have saw off his school bus.
Yeah.
So it's possible there was a car there with a cracked windshield that generated all the witness reports. Maybe they even told a policeman, and the policeman went down there and it wasn't the right car, or the car left after maybe somebody came back after they deserted it after the accident. I also had this crazy idea that they might have hit a deer. It seems like people hit deers a lot around there, and that might have actually been where the Dassey deer came from. There's a police report of a deer being picked up closer to Larrabee that may be the Dassey deer, but he says it was right down the road, so it might be the deer incident. There's something that Sciatic and Bobby Dassey are hiding, and if they aren't the killers, I don't know what it would be, but it might have to do with the vehicle there. So I think that's still an unsolved mystery. I do believe all the witnesses are telling the truth, that they saw a vehicle there. I tend to believe that it was a different car based on the report of the cracked windshield and the timing.
So there we go. The conversation's turned to KK in the live chat. And anyways, so brilliant stuff, Magilla, by the way. I mean, just really, really interesting stuff. There's been, between 65 and 80 people kind of just hanging in here and watching and absorbing this information that you're laying down. So, I mean, excellent job. And for the extra peripheral kind of, knowledge you're going and grabbing and bringing to the discussion and bringing to the presentation. It's great work, man. I gotta commend you on it. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And I just want encourage everybody to keep trying to solve this, because I I think we have some great recent leads, and if we can just find a little more evidence, I think this case may break.
Yeah. Yep. I always encouraging everybody to. I know you may get tired sometimes or weary of it and stuff, and so step away, but just remember to step back. Sometimes we need your voice. We need you to help us out on Twitter and or we need you to sign petitions and stuff. So remember to check back in every once in a while because we may need your voice to help with writing the tables here or writing the playing field or however you want to look at it. So remember to come back and lend us your voice when we need it. So but try to remember, just try to remember that Stephen and Brendan would probably love to be able to just walk out of their jail cells and say, forget this, I'm done with this, but they can't. So, at least we get our freedom out here in the world. We can donate a little bit of our time to try to help them with their situation, right? So.
Amen.
All righty. So that's about it. I think here, let's look at the last few comments here. Moving on. Ford says, Gorilla, thank you for all your hard work and sharing your research with us. My theories go right along with yours. Blessings and see you on Reddit. Mm-hmm. Just keep digging from Vanessa Overton. Awesome video, Magilla and Erekose from Cherie. So actually, great job, great job, man. And thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Paul, for being here, buddy.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And taking over while I had to make a run to the restroom. So thank you for that. Much appreciated.
Can I just add that, yes, KK is still around under obviously the name of Charles Darwin, and he has commented. The last one, interestingly, seemed to be focusing on snidey comments about the fact that Colburn's getting everywhere with his case and Kathleen Zellner is being held up, as if this is some sort of evidence that that there's no no case for Kathleen Zellner to follow. It's pretty bizarre, but it's typical Ken Kratz trying to just it comes across as this angry drunk, doesn't it? Swiping.
Yeah, that was a good analogy. That was a good analogy.
But yeah, great stuff, Magilla. Look, are we doing the same again next week? We've got some more to do, haven't we?
Well, we've at least got Brendan Dassey at the end.
Yeah, I can put some more together. Sounds good.
Yeah, we'll do it. I'll set it up for next Sunday and same time, 1:30.
Well, I think to be honest, that there is so much stuff to go through, isn't there?
Sure. There's
Yeah. Well, so 3, you think? 1?
I mean, I'm one of these people that I need to be told it, several times before it really sinks in,
Indeed. Hey, so what time? Same time next weekend, Paul?
Well, we could
we're trying to establish here.
Yeah, well, let's make it the what was going to be the time. I do apologize. I had a meeting and a practice that I had to go to, so I said to the dude, you can either start without me and I'll join in, or he said, I'll just bump it. So, but as it turned out, I would have been fine for my 9 o'clock, which is Magilla's 3 o'clock, and your 1 o'clock.
1, yeah.
So right. Yeah, same time, yeah.
Okay, all right. Same bad time, same bad channel next Sunday, folks.
Thank you, guys.
All righty.
Thank
you for being here. Paul, thank you everybody for being here and in the live chat with a lot of brilliant comments. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe and we'll see you.